Key West Philosopher-Pirate, the penultimate song on Bob Dylan's latest album, Rough and Rowdy Ways. Dylan scholar and English professor Kevin Saylor says that this song should really be considered the end of the album, with Murder Most Foul being more of a coda. Well, it is definitely true that the song makes for a great album closer and feels like one. Meanwhile, Murder Most Foul is this colossal epic, even by Dylan's standards, so it obviously makes a great closer. Pretty incredible. This is not the first time he's done this in his career. Bringing it all back home ends with 3 songs in a row, any one of which would make for a great, epic album. Swan Song. Didn't just happen during his young, artistic era stay either. Way later in life, the Tempest album, 2012, if you can believe it. Good God, time flies. But it ends with, the second to last song there is a almost 14-minute song about the Titanic. So epic, big, bold, ambitious would have been a great way to close the album. And then after that, we have a tribute to John Lennon. Obviously, that would be a great way to shut down really any album. And actually, even Tin Angel, the third to last song, would have been a great choice. But I'm not arguing this is the norm by Dylan. It's not. Usually, like Sugar Baby, Unlove and Theft, it's clear, like, the songs lead up, the final songs that lead up to a song like that. However, back to this excellent album, Rough and Rowdy Ways, he does once again go back to this device. And this, by the way, I believe is a picture of Bob Dylan's actual boat. I don't know that he has it any longer, but he was a sailing enthusiast. And he sailed in the Caribbean. And we know for a fact he is fond of Key West, the actual place. This is not his sail or boat, by the way. So all of that is how you get a fantastic song like this, in terms of the surface subject matter, at least. So what is this song like? Well, it's definitely like Highlands, his, funny enough, album closer from the masterful Time Out of Mind. In Highlands, he makes the Scottish Highlands a mythic place, at least in part. I mean, it is the real Scottish Highlands, and it's not at the same time. That is definitely a similar vibe to what's happening here. Funny enough, the Highlands are, of course, up high, and the keys are down low. Something that Dylan goes back to over and over again throughout the song is down. The stanzas almost always end with something like, down in the flatlands, way down in Key West, down on the bottom, way down in Key West, and variations of that, down under. And Key West certainly is way down. It's the southernmost point of the continental United States, as you can see here. I've stood on this spot. But anyway, these two favorite places of Dylan's, Key West and Highlands, the up and down dichotomy, I think, is a little interesting. They're both remote. They're both extremes, away from the middle, away from the norm, and they're both places that people escape to, and historically both associated with outlaws and rebels. As someone who grew up in Florida and loves Key West, I was elated that he dedicated a song to it. I once saw a boat down there with the name Keys Disease. Do you know what the Keys Disease is? That's when you go to the Florida Keys and decide you're not leaving. And that really does happen. You're there at the sunset watching ritual, pictured here, and you wonder, why don't I just cash in my 401k, find some crappy job here, and just get by living on sponge cake, as Jimmy Buffett would say. Day drink in a saloon, like Hemingway did, that kind of a thing. This is that actual saloon, by the way. Regardless, so Dylan, I think, felt the call. We know from historian and friend of his, or at least acquaintance, Douglas Brinkley, that Dylan has visited Key West on and off throughout his life. It's a very low-quality picture, but the only one I could find. Here's his stool from that bar. That bar has a tree growing inside of it and actual dead people under the floor, not just the one marked by this tombstone here. So yeah, life and death in one place, and you can literally walk over someone's grave while you drink. The locale of the Keys is enchanting enough to Dylan that this is the second time he's taken a run out of it as a songwriter. In 1967, he wrote the song Florida Key that he never set to music or recorded. Many decades later, he returns to the subject with a much more ambitious and grander and more mysterious song, so let's get into it. Here's a little bit of the intro. It's very slow and stately, takes its time too. As does the entire song, that's for sure. The lyrics start with an obvious allusion to the assassination of President McKinley, seen here, and they echo the 1926 song White House Blues, which is about that event. McKinley hollered, McKinley squalled. Doctor said McKinley, death is on the wall. I heard all about it. He was going down slow. Here's the final couplet of this first stanza. At about song speed, Dylan's pacing is remarkable in this song. It's so languid. Heard it on the wireless radio down in the boondocks, way down in Key West. Just a tremendous amount of space around the words and phrases on this song. So here's Charlie Poole, who did White House Blues. And anyway, this is an odd start for a song ostensibly about Key West because McKinley had no relation to it of any kind. However, this song comes right before Murder Most Foul, a 17-minute epic about a different presidential assassination, and it's also on this album, which deals with Julius Caesar's assassination. And if that wasn't enough, the song False Prophet, a song that got special art dedicated to it, I wonder why, when properly decoded, and I think I'm the only one that's done that, see my video on that song, is about a certain recent president, possibly deserving the same fate. Look at that shadow. The first stanza then establishes some important things. Dylan is already, the song's narrator is already in Key West, but he still knows what's going on in our world, kind of the real world, if you will. And what happens in the real world is bad, violent stuff. Down in the Boondocks is the name of an old song from 1965 about star-crossed lovers, with the narrator of the song being from the wrong side of the tracks, by the way. Now let's touch on just the first half of the next stanza. I'm searching for love and inspiration on that pirate radio station. It's coming out of Luxembourg and Budapest. You're looking at some actual radio pirates from Dylan's day. They established Radio Caroline and would broadcast from the ocean into England, circumventing BBC control. Note that the wireless radio, a very anachronistic note from the previous stanza, helped prepare us for this radio theme, which is going to continue. Pirate radio is about playing and saying whatever you want. Luxembourg and Budapest are the names of two cities that broadcast pirate radio famously at different times in history. So, in a way, they're a symbol of freedom. And, old-fashioned pirates, even though they would kill and plunder and all that, they were also symbols of freedom, right? Well, Key West has an actual pirate history. There's a pirate museum there. I've been there. So this is a clever blending of two things Bob Dylan loves. Early rock and roll, that whole rebellious scene that entranced him like it did so many others. Remember, he wrote that listening to Elvis for the first time felt like breaking out of jail. And he's melding that nonconformity typified by pirate radio with the actual historical record in Key West, the place this song is about. And bear with me for a second here. Recall that on the mythical pirate radio station he's listening to in his mythical Key West, where he's hearing about the real-world assassination of President McKinley, he's not just hearing the news. It's like he's actually in the room. Pirate radio is free of all censorship. You can get the unfiltered truth. Their lawlessness gives them a freedom to be honest, or to quote Bob Dylan from a completely different song, quote, "To live outside the law, you must be honest," end quote. Next stanza, Key West is the place to be if you're looking for immortality. Stay on the road, follow the highway sign. Key West is fine and fair. If you lost your mind, you'll find it there. Key West is on the horizon line. A considerable part of the road to Key West is going over the ocean, and not just for like one short stretch, right? It happens over and over again. Kind of a unique experience. I have a feeling that stood out to Bob. The most important part of that stanza is that it sets Key West up as a kind of heaven, but one that is also here on Earth, on our plane of existence. You can actually get to it. That becomes important later. Meanwhile, we're looking at an actual painting by Bob Dylan so that I can read the next stanza. I was born on the wrong side of the railroad track, like Ginsberg, Corso, and Kerouac, like Louie and Jimmy and Buddy and all of the rest. Let's stick with this image of Kerouac trying to pick up a radio signal, because how perfect is that? Maybe he's trying to hear a pirate radio station. But anyway, in these last two lines, you basically get a list of beat poets and 1950s musicians. So basically, the two forces whose confluence arguably created Dylan the artist. One quick thing to notice here is that Wrong Side of the Tracks is a echo of Boondocks from earlier. As we've often pointed out in these videos, Dylan does a lot of metaphorical rhyming, if you will. Another simple thing to point out is that while Jimmy probably refers to Jimmie Rodgers, one of Dylan's early influences, but I don't think anyone can say Jimmy when Key West is the overall context and not think of Jimmy Buffett. So I like to think Bob slyly got Jimmy into the song, just as a little aside. And if you don't think that's possible, you might want to realize that in an interview, Dylan was once asked who his favorite songwriters were, and the first one he mentioned was Jimmy Buffett. Then he rattled off two obscure but really good songs of Buffett's when asked by the interview for further details. One song he didn't mention, and I'm surprised by that, is A Pirate Looks at 40. He likes that song enough that he's played it live, including with Joan Baez. They also, Dylan and Buffett, that is, not Dylan and Baez, once went boating together in the Caribbean. Well, all that is to say, I think that Jimmy might have played a double purpose on that line. We're still on that one pair of lines, by the way, and here's the really complicated thing to draw out of it. William Burroughs comes into our tale, maybe. William Burroughs was, one of the fathers of the beats. Dylan specifically mentioned the beats, this critical influence to himself. By the way, they met, Dylan and Burroughs, only once as far as I know. It was in 1965. Burroughs didn't even know who Dylan was, but Ginsberg arranged for the meeting. It was at some cafe in New York, so this era Dylan here. Would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that. But regardless, the thing is, Burroughs is the only beat poet who comes up in a Google search when you look for the phrase philosopher-pirate. And yes, we ended up all the way in Madagascar running this down. So there's a book from 2003, a picture essay book of sorts, about a trip down there. Looks fascinating. Well, it turns out the very odd phrase philosopher-pirate, try to Google it, find it in other contexts. It's a really rarely used combination of words. It turns out it shows up multiple times in this book, and specifically in conjunction with William Burroughs. Quote, there is William Burroughs, the philosopher-pirate, end quote. But there's a Captain Mission called a pirate philosopher. See that topmost entry? Okay, who then is Captain Mission? Well, get ready. In a book called The Golden Age of Piracy, I found an actual historical figure called a philosopher-pirate, but his name is Caraccioli. And very importantly, notice in that first paragraph, the island of Madagascar is name-checked. And put a pin in this, Utopia. What in the world is going on here? I'm going to make this brief because we need to get back to the song, but the sailor Mission meets the priest Caraccioli, whose fiery impromptu sermons about the hypocrisy of the rich papacy and wealth inequality in general led Mission and a lot of men, about 200, to become pirates. But they were pirates with a philosophy, get it? Philosopher-pirates. They were kind of a commune at sea, equal distribution of wealth, a little bit of Robin Hood on the water. And legend says that Mission then founded Libertalia, a free pirate colony in Madagascar. And from their hidden utopian base, they fought against the oppressors of society, etc., etc. And it turns out that William Burroughs, very late in his writing career, wrote this book here. It's a novella, and it focuses primarily on Madagascar and Captain Mission and his utopian island pirate base. And hey, guess what? We just happen to know a song about a certain island utopian pirate base. But that island is Key West. Is all of this a coincidence, or a Jungian meaningful coincidence, a synchronicity? I have no idea. But Burroughs was a huge influence on Bob Dylan. He improbably has this tie to not just piracy, but this semi-mythical island home and everything else I talked about in the last few minutes. Meanwhile, it would be very Dylan-esque to list beats early in the song, like he does, while leaving out the most crucial one to this song. It would also be classic Bob to use a book as obscure, no offense, Contingency in Madagascar or Ghost of Chance as an integral part of his songwriting process here. Enter the Junichi Saga and Henry Timrod examples. Hey, we made it to the fourth stanza. We're in the middle of it. The thing is, this song has 14 of them. A whopping 652 words across 85 lines, by the way. So I'm going to have to be a little bit more selective going forward, but next line after that stanza, I got both my feet planted square on the ground, got my right hand high with the thumb down. Such is life, such is happiness. The line about his feet is interesting because it's kind of anti-utopian in a way, right? He's living in the real world, it seems. which is contradictory, or seemingly so, based on what he said earlier, but we'll get back to that. Meanwhile, the right hand with the thumb down seems to be a Roman emperor, gladiatorial illusion, and this album and this phase in Dylan's career, the songs are, of course, dripping with ancient Greek and Roman references. And right after that came that line, such is life, such is happiness, which is odd, because to live in the, kind of circumstance where somebody else gets to decide the fate of others, where there's life and death, well, that doesn't sound like a utopian place. It doesn't sound like heaven, right? Remember the note about immortality. But I think that and other points in the song show that Key West is an idealized place, but it's not heaven. Remember, he's hearing about McKinley's assassination on the radio when he's there. It's tethered to our world, and so is he. And we'll come across more of that juxtaposition, but hibiscus flowers grow everywhere here. As Dr. Christopher Ricks would say, you're invited to think about a previous line, and that being, I've got my feet planted, as in plant. And that's an overall hint, because there's a lot of flora references in this song, and that seems to mean something, because it's a lot. No fauna references, nothing about roosters, which just seem to be all over the place in Key West. The very small deer that you see, this peculiar breed, dolphins, marlins, nothing like that. Let's get through the next stanza, but not really touch on any particular points. Key West is the place to go, down by the Gulf of Mexico, beyond the sea, beyond the shifting sand. Key West is the gateway key to innocence and purity. Key West is the enchanted land. Well, I lied. I'll restrict myself to notice there's a play on the word key, right? Key West, gateway key, so unlocking something. Notice the rhyme scheme here, because it's the one used in the whole song. The first two lines rhyme, then the third rhymes with the last, and the fourth and the fifth rhyme. So basically AA, B, CC, B. The most important rhyme by far then is going to be the 3 and 6. So notice shifting sand, enchanted land. Sand, enchanted, and land. He manages to fit that predominant sound in there 3 times instead of just twice, which is really simple rhyming, right? Just at the end of the 2 lines. Next stanza introduces a big player in this song, and a new one, the Wizard of Oz. I've never lived in the land of Oz. That strikes that contradiction that we talked about before, where he's in Key West, and Key West is some kind of mythical place, but it's also real, and the real Key West. The tiny blossoms of a toxic plant, they can make you dizzy, I'd like to help you, but I can't. Another Wizard of Oz reference. The poppies, of course, basically the opium in The Wizard of Oz. And it also, notice, resurrects the flower motif, which is going to continue. This image here, by the way, is from the first filmed production of Wizard of Oz. Oz seems to be a real important factor in the song, even though it's not mentioned very much or alluded to. Some have observed that this song is Dylan's Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and I think there's something to that. They both sing about this idealized place, etc., but really it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's how this whole song began. Dylan, looking at a red hibiscus flower, remember that from earlier, and that in Key West, and that making him think of the poppies from Wizard of Oz. And if that seems absolutely insane, remember that this is central to Dylan's art, taking one song and radically transforming it. This is the guy who says, "It's all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding," a bleak beat poetry, epic song about modern life, alienation, and despair, was his version of Elvis's "It's All Right, Mama." And back to the puppies, then, we have this note of plants being an obstacle, distracting you, something dangerous. So that's interesting, considering that Key West, the real one, is this very lush locale. And it's a recurrence of this idea that Key West isn't perfect. It isn't right heaven, like I said before. One writer, got his name here somewhere, Larry Fife, said Key West seems to be betwixt heaven and earth, and I completely agree. In fact, in the early listens, the song reminded me of Tolkien, where when the elves die, they sail away. They stay here on Earth, but they sail away and never come back. They sail away to the undying lands, but those undying lands are here, just across the ocean. But back to the plants, the very next stanza starts, "The fishtail palms and the orchid trees, they can give you the bleeding heart disease." And to have a bleeding heart means to care too much, of course, but as is often the case with Dylan, you have to look in the dictionary and look at more than just the primary meaning for a word and or phrase, and he usually manages to incorporate both. So, as you see here, the secondary meaning of bleeding heart has to do with plant life again, with flora. What were the odds? But anyway, in the song he says bleeding heart disease, and that was a striking enough phrase that I looked it up, and somebody actually made a song called Bleeding Heart Disease. The band NOFX, or No Special Effects, maybe is what they were called, I don't know. And man, I wish I'd known about them at the time, because I was listening to, hardcore, punk rock, skate rock back then, but I didn't know there was like a Latino subgenre. I really wish I had. Anyway, they were from LA. They were making music in the early 80s, and as any serious Dylan fan knows, his sons were really into that scene at that time and got him into it. So there actually is a chance Bob Dylan heard the song Bleeding Heart Disease. I mean, hell, Dylan was so into this scene that he picked one of those bands, the Plugs, pictured here, what a great picture, to appear with him on Letterman famously in 1984. Do yourself a favor and read this article from Vulture about that night on Letterman if you never have. Anyway, all this talk about, back to the plants, them giving you a disease and being opium-like also reminded me of Odysseus. Them being intoxicating and distracting you from your path like they did to Dorothy. That reminded me of Odysseus and that kind of a vibe. So, on that point, I noticed one review of the song is entitled Aeneas Goes to Key West. And I was like, yes, that guy gets it. And Odysseus and Aeneas were, of course, sailors in part. Anyway, very next line, real quickly, people tell me I ought to try out a little tenderness. Well, Try Out a Little Tenderness is a song from the 1930s. Next, Dylan starts a new device that he uses in this kind of the second half of the song, where he names very specific things from Key West, like Bayview Park, displaying what Key West Magazine or some such publication called an insider's knowledge of the island. And moving on, I play the gumbo limbo spirituals. I know all the Hindu rituals. There's been a lot of attention on that second line there. So there's spirituality, non-Christian spirituality, but nobody seems to have noticed, I don't think, that gumbo limbo is a type of tree. And a tropical one at that. Continuing, people tell me that I'm truly blessed. Bougainvillea bloomin' in the summer and spring. Winter here is an unknown thing. Down in the flatlands, way down in Key West. Well, as one person noted, bougainvillea, butcher that flower name, looks like a hibiscus flower, so that's interesting. And hibiscus is important in Hindu religion. Think of the lotus. A hibiscus is a lotus, and then think of the lotus eaters that we talked about, and then think about how that ties back to the poppies in Wizard of Oz. This is a very religious stanza. Spirituals, rituals, being blessed. Winter being an unknown thing, that's an allusion to immortality. So many threads, guys, but they really do seem to be part of one tapestry. You might have to step back to like a mile away to catch it all in, to take it all in. Anyway, real quick, the next stanza. Key West is under the sun, under the radar, under the gun. You stay to the left, then you lean to the right. Feel the sunlight on your skin and the healing virtues of the wind. Key West is the land of light. So there you've got the sun and light. And of course, there's I did already mention this, I forget, the famous sunset watching ritual in Key West. So there's certainly that kind of light, much less just the bright sun that's there all year round. Key West is under the sun, under the radar, under the gun. That's all down, down, down. And remember that almost every stanza ends with Key West being, down in the flatlands, way down in Key West. So it kind of reinforces that. And now the part about leaning one way and then another, one person sees that, one writer saw that as an allusion to Virgil and the path to the underworld, basically heaven versus hell. That's quite possible, would fit. Seems like a little bit of a stretch. Something more obvious is that it's a sailing reference. Someone else said you do that when you're sailing. You lean one way to go the other. And if you're sailing, you would feel the sunlight on your skin and the wind, so that makes sense too. Of course, you're going to feel the sun and wind if you're just standing on the beach too. Yeah, there's more to say here, but I've got to move on. After I say this, that is, the important thing with this stanza is that Key West is not easy to get to, right? Counterintuitive, left to the right, but it's a healing place when you get there. And that's important. But next, wherever I travel, wherever I roam, I'm not that far from the convent home. Let's read some Edgar Allan Poe. On desperate seas long wont to roam, thy hyacinth hair, thy classic face, thy naiad airs have brought me home to the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome. That is from To Helen. I just read you a third of it. It's a very short poem, and you should read it if you're interested in another possible inspiration for this song. You know, it has a flower in hair, right? Hyacinth hair. It has this Greco-Roman Odysseus Aeneas sailing dimension. This is Helen from Helen of Troy from the movie, the most recent movie on these on the Iliad anyway. Poe's poem also has, roaming, which could be a coincidence, obviously, but it does have that. And it even has this aspect of like a special mythical place in the final stanza. Anyway, the whole Poe angle is definite speculation and was part of a couplet, just one line. And the second line refers to this. Remember the Maine? I just made a history joke. That was the ship whose sinking led to us, basically led to the start of the Spanish-American War. It turns out that ship had originally set sail from, you guessed it, Key West, because if you're going to Cuba, that's the closest launch point, and Key West is where injured Marines returned to, and they went to a convent, the quote-unquote convent home from this line in the song. That convent home was converted into a field hospital, basically. So that's an oblique reference to a very specific thing from Key West history. Dylan gets much more specific right after that. Mystery Street off Mallory Square, Truman had his White House there. And he did. Here's Truman at his Key West White House, which was known as the Little White House. He was basically ordered by his doctor to get somewhere warm. He was exhausted in the wake of World War II. He ended up in Key West on vacation. This is in November of 1946. Liked it so much he went back again, and then decided, you know what, I can set up shop here. And he did. 175 days of his presidency were spent right here. And from politics back to religion. Next stanza, 12 years old, and they put me in a suit, forced me to marry a prostitute. There were gold fringes on her wedding dress. That's my story, but not where it ends. She's still cute, and we're still friends. Down in the bottom, way down in Key West. Well, luckily people decoded this for us. This is a reference to the prophet Hosea, who we're looking at here, being revealed slowly, because we are told he was forced to marry a harlot. Now, the 12 years old and being forced into a suit bit seems to reference Bob Dylan's bar mitzvah. And this whole stanza, therefore, seems to be about his relationship to the faith he was taught when he grew up. A faith that, as far as we can tell, he neither completely abandoned nor ever completely embraced. I mean, after all, he became a Christian. Hence the line, "We're still friends." We have made it to the penultimate stanza. The song is actually starting to wrap up, and Dylan gives us a clue about that by bringing back some old themes. First, though, I play both sides against the middle, picking up that pirate radio signal. I heard the news. I heard your last request. Fly around, my pretty little miss. I don't love nobody. Give me a kiss. Down at the bottom, way down in Key West. Well, that first line is really interesting, coming as it does right after a stanza about Dylan's personal faith. I play both sides. This is someone who's flirted with Judaism and Christianity. And now what I alluded to earlier, the pirate radio bit and the line about hearing news on it and the last request should all remind us of the McKinley incident from the very beginning of the song. Yes, even the last request part, because if you remember the first stanza of the song, McKinley is asked if he has anything to confess. So again, a dying man. Fly Me Around, My Pretty Little Miss references yet another old song. It's just unbelievable how many times Dylan does that on this album. But that pretty much moves us on to the final stanza. And don't worry, because I know it's taken a lot of work to get here. It's a fairly straightforward one. Key West is the place to be if you're looking for immortality. Key West is paradise divine. Key West is fine and fair. If you lost your mind, you'll find it there. Key West is on the horizon line. Pretty much a succinct summation of the point of the song, right? There is something divine about it. It's a place of healing. Funny enough, that's how Harry Truman found the real Key West. He was sent there on a healing vacation. Meanwhile, President McKinley is a president who was not healed, quite the opposite. And yet they both inhabit not just the song, but this mythical Key West. So the song begins with death and ends with life. As a reminder, this song has been called Dylan's Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and it really is like that. Dorothy traveled to Oz, like physically, and came back, or did she? But you get the point, and it's the same kind of place like that. It's fantastical and yet real. And just a couple of side notes. Key West is full of street performers like this, but I mean like real old school circus sideshow type street performers. I saw a father and son escape artist team there. Remember that Dylan is, I mean, we know this, he's obsessed with the old world syndrome of the circus coming to town, right? These freaks are going to show up, break up your mundane existence, create this fantasy place and feel that you get to step into and enjoy for a while. Surely part of that is why he loves Key West, the actual Key West, so much, I would say. I know this image looks terrible, but it's a still from a video I took, and I wanted to include at least something from the pictures and video I took when I was down in Key West, and that's the only one I could find. The other thing is that Ernest Hemingway is inextricably linked to Key West. Here's the running of the Hemingways, and I was really surprised he doesn't seem to be hinted at anywhere in the song. Very surprising, especially since he and Dylan both share a distinction, the Nobel Prize in Literature. Two of America's great literary voices, both inspired by the same place, and you can see why. How Dylan approached this song is certainly only something he would come up with. Listen to the song. It's really beautiful and moving, actually. So part of this is how great the song feels, and it feels appropriate to its mysterious subject. And anyway, that is it. Thanks.